Let's move on to our next panel, which further explores the topics of cookies. We'll focus on how the TCF, Transparency Consent Framework, will work in this new world. To lead this panel, I'd like to welcome Thomas, VP of Publishing, Central Europe, and Head of External Relations for EMEA at Xandr. Again, I'd like to everyone, thank you again for all those questions in the last panel. Please, again, submit your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box. But for now, I will hand over to you, Thomas.
Thanks, David. I'm very happy to welcome this wonderful panel with Fiona and Jacques and also Elena. And now we have 30 minutes to talk not only about how does the future looks like without cookies, but also what this mean for the TCF in general. Because we have just heard that the industry, everyone prepares for a world without third-party cookies. We all know it's coming. We all know it's there in some formats like in-app and CTV. But we would like to then now explore what does that means for the TCF. So I'm heading up the steering group at the IB group for the TCF activities, and I received questions like, if the cookie is going to be deprecated, then will the TCF also going to be deprecated because it's all based on cookies? And we were thinking about this, then for sure not. And we want to elaborate in the last 30 minutes why it might be even more important to dig into the TCF and what this means. So first, I will hand over to Fiona then for your first thought. How do you see that the TCF is going to work then once the cookies have been deprecated? That's an interesting question, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Thomas. When you look at what a cookie is under GDPR, it's personal data, and any IDs that replace that and relate to an individual and being able to identify in combination with other data an individual is actually still personal data. So the GDPR still applies. Also, in Europe, the e-privacy directive still also applies, because to the extent that any of these IDs, whether they're deterministic, probabilistic, cohort IDs, if they're being placed on a user's device is being accessed for this purpose, then the e-privacy directive will apply. So we still have a need for a way for gathering consent in accordance with the e-privacy directive for accessing devices, and also for further use of that personal data for further processing on a granular basis for purposes. So it's really just going to continue to be providing the same level of value that it's already providing, to be able to transmit those signals and to be able to provide at the front end at the publisher site or the advertiser site, depending on where the user is interacting, that ability to provide those disclosures through consent management platforms to the user, and then the ability to be able to transmit those signals through the ecosystem.
That's very interesting. Thanks for the great introductions. Elena, over to you. Does the TCF then represent the basis that the industry can build on? How is your opinion and the opinion of Adform?
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of TCF for one main reason. It has established where its main purpose was to transmit and to communicate a consent signal and in general user choices across the ecosystem, in particular in the downstream. And such framework has been embraced with quite successful among publishers, and then I think slowly also we're seeing a very good uptake also among advertisers. But when we look at the main difference between third-party cookies and first-party IDs replacing the third-party cookies, I think TCF is not having a less important role. On the contrary, it will play maybe an even more important role, because the role of the parties will change from a GDPR perspective. Who is a controller, who is a processor, who potentially is going to be a joint controller, maybe both of the parties between where the data is shared. And then that is why it is even more important for the users to get transparency as who are the players with whom, like a publisher or an advertiser is going to share, its data with. And second, it is important for those who receive that data to establish privacy compliance within the ecosystem and be able to recalibrate, adjust framework speed, moving from a DPA to a joint control agreement potentially, or hopefully the conversation will touch upon those points a little bit later in this panel. But TCF will remain, and it shall be kept as an important framework that ensures transparency and trust within the ecosystem.
Yeah, thanks, Elena. So what I hear is that the TCF is flexible enough in terms of technology to support different use cases, even if there are some changing opinions and regulations. The TCF is flexible enough to adopt, right?
I think Fiona has mentioned one underlying concept. So she was saying, she was calling out upon the type of IDs, and then if it's first party or if it's third party, it's still personal data, and then compliance with the GDPR and e-privacy has to be established. And through the TCF, we're going to see, and the RTB protocol, we're going to see like first-party IDs replacing the third parties, and that is why it doesn't make any difference if it's first party or third party. You know, compliance with the GDPR still has to be established, and TCF, it's there to transmit those signals across, like in a standardized way across the ecosystem. So it is flexible. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for elaborating on that. Within the IB Europe, as I think David mentioned, there's a new working group that exactly works on the harmonization of the TCF with all of the different identity solutions. The differentiation is between like deterministic, then which is where there is an ID, there's like a login, like a registration, like a common ID, unified ID is one of those, and that ID the other one. There's also probabilistic solution, but still there's a need to be GDPR compliant, even if only using other information. There's a Google Sandbox specific and also non-ID solution. So the question is now to Jacques, now you're from the buy side. The question is, what does the advertiser really care about which solution it will be? So what's the interest and how do you see it from a more, I would say, practical point of view?
Hi, I'm Jacques. I work for Starcom UK, Programmatic Group Director. Yeah, so how does ID solutions, TCF and ID solutions, how do they all translate and what are clients thinking? We can't just say, okay, the TCF is more about just making sure we're compliant with the law, and then we've got consent and we get the right signals or the right data from our consumers and then link them to a UID and then pat ourselves on the back and say, congratulations, job done. We've replaced the cookie, we can all go home. It's absolutely not. If you take that kind of approach, you've gone completely wrong. A few of the previous panels have alluded to a lot of the challenges and to some of the thinking and talking about the fragmentation. And ultimately, what it really boils down to is that we need to look at how we use this data. We can't go and carry on saying we're going to take data for targeting. We need to evolve that data to data for insights. Now, I can back up that position quite strongly in the sense that if you look at how the CPM on Safari versus Chrome has evolved, the current research will show you that you are paying anywhere from 1.5 to 3 times the amount on a Chrome browser as opposed to a Safari browser because of the bit density, because of our inherent love of data, right? This idea of one-to-one. We need to separate that, right? There is going to be a breaking point. So we need to then also look at things like what's happening with limited ad tracking and Apple tracking transparency on the app side. Globally, there's only a 21% uptake saying yes. In the next 2-3 years' time, even with TCF as a framework and multiple UID solutions, even if we come up with a standard and we say we've connected them all beautifully, you are only going to have an internet of about 5 to 20% of authenticated users. Now, at the moment, it's about 60%, but if that number keeps going down, the costs will keep going up. So we need to start saying to ourselves, no, let's look at data for insights. So look at that small amount of users that you can using your first party data. So looking at the things that they love, what makes those people tick? What makes them say, you know what, I love this brand because of that. This is my trusted news source. These are the kind of things that make me excited and get me out of bed in the morning. Use that information to then broadly target without using data, just saying the data informed my media planning, informed the way I think about the world, and then deliver your media within partnerships that fit the brief. And as you do that, you will then actually find that that kind of approach further respects this privacy by design. So whilst yes, there's a lot of interest in all the different users and there's a lot of work still need to be done and advertisers are trying to navigate through all of this, there's still a fair amount to go as we build on our CDPs and understand how TCF links to all the UIDs. But they ultimately need to change from data for targeting to data for insights.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting information. Thanks, Jacques, for that. So, Fiona, question: how will this approach, like data for insights, then also work in a DSP, work for MediaMath, because, and how would you say it can be harmonized then with the TCF, because there will be maybe the need for the usage of some personal data in this context, right?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point that Jacques raised here about working with the information that we have through the targeting capabilities now, and then building out further modeling for being able to create insights. And certainly MediaMath has that in its brain optimization. We are building for that, so we have a pathway towards solutions by using all the different types of identifiers. The TCF is really important in that for Europe as well, so that we can actually make sure that we're gathering these insights in a way for our clients that can be supported in a lawful way, and continue to do that in this post-third-party cookie environment.
Thanks. Elena, do you also want to add to that from an Adform perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've touched upon, Thomas, like what is the view of the advertisers and how do they, and mention upon the concept of deterministic IDs and how does that look like. And for us, what we see, what we notice internally when we speak with our clients, that is most of like the brands on the brand side, is that the advertisers, they don't understand exactly yet how to reach out to those audiences, replacing the third party ones with the first party. They start to enter into a panic mode and lack understanding, but also awareness as to what extent do the existing ID solutions that are employed, by third parties or exist on the market, and how do they fit in within their audience building capabilities, and also make sure that they do not lose the audience that they have accumulated so far. And I think, so there are like some advertisers, they're very advanced actually, but that is the minority of them. And we try to educate the advertisers to look into, to focus on exploring the identity solutions that exist at this point. And with the carve out that we at Adform, we accommodate all of different types of IDs that currently exist within the ecosystem, and be it deterministic type of IDs or be probabilistic. We don't know yet how the privacy sandbox at Google is going to work. Primarily, I think there's going to be only like within the Chrome's browsing, but all in one. We do encourage advertisers to elaborate and to engage in-house counseling and privacy counsel to evaluate the identity solutions that exist out there. And then a bit to go on one-on-one with discussions with vendors such as we do, and we have initiatives and have certain working groups internally where we then explore those kind of questions. We've put together FAQs, which we will hand over to the clients, that elaborate on the topics of how does the privacy framework look like for advertisers in the context of moving and transacting on first-party IDs only.
Yeah, just going back a little bit from first-party IDs to common IDs, which is industry IDs, before we enter a new subject. Fiona, one question that I read recently that about 100 different ID solutions in the US, for example. So how many of those will be relevant? How many of those will survive? And how will the industry, how can the industry scale if it's so super fragmented? Sorry for this very complex question, but just before we leave the field of common ID, I wanted to raise that.
That is a big question. I personally wasn't aware that there were that many common IDs. And I think probably it's actually going to come out in the wash, like what key industry players are supporting what solutions. And I'm not sure that 100 IDs would survive, because it's like the operational challenges of that start to become difficult to scale. So I think coalescence around a few common IDs would be important for scalability in the industry.
Yeah, I really like the sharpness of your questions, to the point. That's great. So they're not going to survive all of them. That's good to know. But the question is then also, how would you as an advertiser then focus on which one to choose if you don't know that the publisher is going to support this? So this is like a chicken and egg, who goes first and where does the scale come from? We come to that question a little bit later, maybe, about what the advertiser and publisher then they need to do. But before we go into this direction, there's a new service layer within the TCF. It's called the CMPs. So the CMPs that collect the consent of the user and then store it. We also read about first publisher ID and how this all comes together. A question to Elena now: if you think about the authentication, is this something that publisher should go in this direction, then to create a persistent first-party ID? And then later on, the second part of the question, Jacques, we come to you, thinking about how the advertiser then also is able to reach those first-party IDs. But for is this authentication of consent, registered consent? Is this the way that you see the market is going?
I think it's still difficult to predict, the volume of or the decision and basically what exactly is going to publisher decide for, and then the volume of that decision and how does that resonate on the advertiser side. What we notice is that, for example, publishers that focus on deterministic type of IDs, for example, I think they provide a high level of accuracy, for example, but on the other side, we see potentially the downside of deterministic IDs is that they're not as scalable as other type of IDs. And I do see also, however, on the advertiser side, those brands that have already a very robust user database to go for deterministic IDs, because deterministic IDs, as we know, for example, NetID, they are linked to an email address, right? And I do foresee those brands going for that kind of identity solution, so that when the brand meets the publisher where their campaigns are going to be published, there is a accurate matching rate, and therefore the deterministic type of IDs are going to be embraced in those kind of instances. On the other side, I think the CMP will still be a core and an essential function that will play within learning brands, but also publishers learning about their audiences, about the users that are visiting their pages, and how to target, whom to target. Because you have to link the audience that you've built within the CRM with the audience that you see that is visiting your site. And that can be done, either you have the same type of IDs that you deploy, or there is certain inferences that you build through machine learning that would connect the dots between A and B. And authenticated consent, I think I would be cautious to give some prediction on that front. But what I would like to think is that, or what we also see on advertiser side, is many advertisers are starting to populate their first-party ID data silos by deploying first-party ID tracking, first-party cookies on their sites. Before they decide which ID solution they're going to use, they need to also build up a database of first-party IDs. So this is what we've witnessed so far.
Perfect. Before we go to Jacques, Fiona, your ideas and your suggestions against consent fatigue and authenticated consent, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think consent fatigue is definitely a challenge. It's been raised in the UK and in the government, talking about challenges to wanting to make the pathway for the user interaction to be smoother. So I think one of the challenges for CMPs and working in with the transparency and consent framework as they start to develop post third-party cookies is to, first of all, provide some sort of further education to users, which may be more than language disclosures. I'm a real fan of visuals and diagrams or videos to be able to help people understand, because part of the fatigue is reading legalese and language and trying to understand the definitions. So to the extent that we can educate the broader community more about the value exchange in a way that's digestible, then the real meaningful consent or legitimate interest understanding and objection to that has a real understanding in the broader community. And I think this is built into the transparency and consent framework plan as well. The more we educate the consumers, the more there's going to be an understanding, the broader that is. But people have different learning pathways, so we need to have a multiple layered approach to this. And that's not just multiple layers on privacy policy disclosures, but animation, videos, communication, all the talking that people are doing. The news articles that come up that are brought up in a way of concern about privacy and cookies have been really helpful to the industry, in my opinion, because it's helped to create some impetus for the industry to refine and define the processes and the way that we're interacting. And the value to society is so huge on targeted advertising and reaching the audience and pulling together the advertisers and the publishers and supporting content, that there has to be a way forward. So I see all of these challenges as being challenges to create optimism to a path forward for a really flourishing digital economy globally.
That's a very good outlook. So I see the flowers of the digital area growing, which is great. And I recently joined a panel where they were discussing about a Nutri-score, like an ABC, how data sensitive it can be to make it easier for user to understand what's the actual choice is. So Jacques, over to you. We talked a lot about activation. So there is first-party data from a publisher, first-party data from an advertiser, and how to connect those tissues. And there's both of them, they need like a legal basis. That's clear. That's what the TCF can also do. But how then to activate those? So there's this concept of the new thing of the clean rooms, or how does this work with the CDP? So maybe you can elaborate on that, how you see this coming.
Yeah, clean rooms are one of those things that are coming to the forefront quite rapidly now. I think COVID did slow a few advertisers down as they went from trying to fix data to trying to fix survival. But now, good to see everyone's back in investing and looking at this problem head on. And while some are still going, I need a CDP, I need to work out my ID solutions, I need to work out how to collect my data. And it's also on the publisher side. We're seeing more and more publishers putting up, you have to log in to do the content. And that's good to see that they're testing and trying different methodologies so that when we do get to a point of, okay, now we need to enact on all of this, it's not going to be a big shock to the system. So it's very encouraging to see everyone getting involved in this process. And when it comes to clean rooms, I personally love them. I think they are a wonderful solution because without intending to, they solve many problems. One of the biggest challenges that we have in an industry is the way that we collaborate. We've always had this conversation about, if I spend $1, where did it actually go? Or in the TCF framework, okay, have I got legitimate consent? Am I acting in an ethical and a moral way? Now, having a clean room is brilliant because it says I need to collaborate. So I can take my CDP data and my first party data, stick it in a clean room, but then I have to go have a conversation with someone else. I have to go say to them, hey, I've got this clean room. Can we work together? And as a result, the number of parties getting involved gets cut down very quickly. And that's brilliant because then more money ends up going to quality media, which you've now, if you move away from data for targeting into data for insights, you're only going to work with people that align with your insights. So you ultimately end up funding better media. You end up funding more quality media. And I think for us as an industry, that is crucial. That is the bottom line, right? So we need to make sure that we're looking after both the supply and the buy side. And clean rooms sort your SBO, they sort your data compliance problems. So that it does a multitude of things without ever, I think, really thinking that it was ever going to do that much, but it actually does, and it's a fantastic way to do it. And I encourage everyone, as soon as you've worked out what CDP is and how CMPs feed into that and how you align your internal business structures, start thinking about clean rooms, start thinking about partnerships, make sure that you're talking to the publishers and get all the right people in the room.
Well, it's like a motivation speech for collaboration, which is great. And for CDPs, it's important, and also for the clean rooms that both ends use the same identifier. So this is like the essential still that both need to have an ID, both need to be collected and with all based on all the different requirements of the GDPR and privacy. So it's like the end, the final stage of how an industry can collaborate. We only have 1 or 2 minutes left. Anyone else wants to say something about clean rooms before we go to the last round of questions?
I actually wanted to quickly add something because clean rooms is one of the big topics we have discussions with publishers and advertisers. And then, as Jacques was saying, we do that kind of collaboration internally. So we do take publishers and we do take advertisers, and then we put them in the same room to discuss and elaborate on the concept of clean rooms, and to make sure that the clean room of the advertiser and the clean room of the publisher do not commingle the data they put in. That is why, so the concept itself of a clean room is as self-explanatory as it is, and that data is not, is kept separate, and then only the results that are coming out. And this is the biggest debate what are the roles of the party on the results, and then what is the role of the vendors that receive those results. But that is, I think, it's a topic for a different panel.
So cool. So we're at the end of the panel. There's one question I'm going to ask at the end, but first, 30 seconds answer to each of you, a different question. So we're going to make it a little bit more interesting than just the same question. To you, Elena, 30 seconds answer. Which of the solutions like deterministic, probabilistic, sandbox APIs, and idealist like contextual will be the most important one to focus in the next years?
Which one is the most important to focus on? I think it will be naive for me to call out upon one of them, because there is still so much uncertainty on the privacy sandbox, how exactly that is going to play a role within the ecosystem outside of the Chrome browser. Then second, with respect to deterministic, as I mentioned, it provides a high level of accuracy and one-on-one identification, but at the same time, it also, we see that it can potentially have a lower scale. And on the probabilistic type of IDs, they do work on most of the browsers, same for deterministic IDs, and then they have like much more scalability potential, but they have less accuracy, contrary to the deterministic. All in one, I still think it's first-party IDs are the holy grail within the ad tech space and running targeted advertisement. And essential will it be for publishers and advertisers, I think, to make up their mind on what kind of IDs they're going to populate their first-party data silos. And then based on that, we will see for sure, at least this is my expectation, we'll see for sure certain type of IDs and a fair good split among deterministic, probabilistic, and then the chunk that will go through the privacy sandbox.
Okay, my summary, all of the four, which is great. Fiona, the question to you, the global privacy platform gain traction. Is this, do we get, does this initiative get enough support? Also a short question, short answer.
Completely. Everybody should be leaning into this initiative, the Global Privacy Platform, and which has been led by IAB Tech Lab, and the cross-jurisdiction privacy program, which is, I'm not sure if I named that correctly, but by IAB Legal Affairs. Together, they're leaning into the global challenges. So they're adopting the IAB EU TCF, the IAB CCPA framework. Canada's on board with that now. They've already been working on, they've made a lot of progress on this. They're starting to look at Brazil. I think this is really where I think the future is, to be able to help the challenges of operational compliance, technical compliance for a company.
Thanks, Fiona. I just paid €50 to David that we have 2 additional minutes. So 30 seconds for you, Jacques, I ask you a different question. What would be the wish of an advertiser in the privacy field? What would be your 3 wishes for the advertiser in the field of cookieless?
I think 3 things we need to focus on are going to be collaboration, trust, and ethics. When I say collaboration, bringing people closer together, making sure that, the way we pass data in between and the way we drive insights together, that is going to take a bit of doing. You're going to need to pick your partners and work closely together. So I fully encourage everyone to collaborate. Second one is trust. Now, if you move from data for targeting to data for insights, you're not going to be able to measure on a one-to-one basis, right? You're going to have to let go of that one-to-one targeting and that one-to-one measurement. So you need to trust the value of digital. So my hope is that people actually say there is some value, because I know I've done the right collaboration. I know I can't measure it, so maybe I'm going to have to model it a little bit, or I'm going to have to do some panel data, whatever. But you need to trust the ecosystem to some degree. And the last one is ethics. I think ethics is very important. We need to not just do things within TCF as our guiding principle. You actually need to look at your brand, and you need to say, what is my brand's moral compass? What is my ethics as a company and as a brand? And that is how you should apply your data strategies, not to the letter of the law, but to your own founding principles.
So I don't have additional money in my pocket, so we need to finish now, David. Sorry. We had some questions. We're going to follow up on that afterwards, I believe, right, David?
Yeah, that's correct. And no need for payment. It was time well spent. Those answers were great. And it was thank you, Thomas and panelists. It was a really enjoyable and informative session. It'd be great to hear how the TCF will work with new privacy addressable solutions and to explore what consent will look like in the post third-party cookie era.